Hello and thanks for joining us. The death toll from the Ebola disease in West Africa continues to rise.
Today, Liberia is reporting more than 100 deaths from the virus, and that has residents in Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center increasingly concerned, and for good reason. There's an estimated 30,000 people of Liberian descent living in Minnesota. Brooklyn Park says 10% of its population, about 6,000 to 8,000 people, have ties to Liberia. Hennepin County alerted hospitals and clinics about the possibility of the disease in patients who have traveled to that region. But officials say the actual threat of Ebola here is still very low. Liberia's connection to Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center runs deep. Liberians may live here, but they have a heart for their homeland.
It's going to be called Bluma Elementary School.
From building schools to helping rebuild the country's fire department.
Our team had an opportunity to work side by side with the Liberian firefighters.
The Brooklyns have reached out to connect with Liberia, so people come and go from that region to these cities every week, including dignitaries like the Liberian president who came to Brooklyn Center in 2009.
It's talking about the Ebola case.
And everyday people like Lavette Wallace, who got a text warning her of the growing threat in Africa.
It seemed like the situation is getting worse.
It's a serious situation in Africa.
It's scary and people are dying.
But officials say it's not a threat here.
When we think about the United States, Minnesota, and the Northwest Metro in particular, at this point, no, the risk is very, very small.
The Ebola virus is deadly. There's no vaccine and no treatment. But to contract Ebola, you must come into contact with someone infected. And so far, there are no cases in the U.S.
We need to be alert and prepared, but we don't need to be afraid in Minnesota.
Just because someone has traveled to West Africa doesn't mean they came in contact with Ebola.
If you see someone who just traveled to Liberia and they're fine, it's not a problem.
But officials understand the concern and say the solution is to be aware.
There's absolutely no reason for panic. I think, the appropriate response within the community is certainly, to get educated and make sure that, you understand Ebola.
There are 2 community meetings scheduled for residents to learn more about the Ebola outbreak. The first is on Sunday at 6 p.m. at the Community Activity Center in Brooklyn Park. The Minnesota Department of Health has scheduled a community information session in Brooklyn Center at Constitution Hall on Wednesday. That starts at 6:30.